Kim, welcome to the program. What do you think this is about?
Well, first of all, it's about absolute chaos and mayhem across Lebanon. These pagers went off at about 3:30 in the afternoon across Beirut and other cities in the south and the Bekaa Valley and even in Syria. And yes, they targeted clearly Hezbollah operatives. 9 people were killed, 2,800 injured. But the scenes of ambulances racing around the city, the mayhem that people have been through, the panic as people wondered whether this was targeted or generalized, whether they should get rid of their phones, etc. You know, this is a city and a country that has been through a lot over the last year, but also over the last few years. So that is the state of the mood of the country. It was clearly a targeted attack by Israel against Hezbollah operatives who had gone low tech, because they've been the target of assassinations over the past 10 months, and they've been instructed to, dump their iPhones, get off the internet, disconnect their CCTVs. And as far as we understand from initial reports, this was a new batch of pagers that the group had received, and how exactly they were detonated, I leave that to the experts. The next question, of course, is what comes after this?
Well, exactly. So the Israeli government, I'm just going to read their comment, has blamed Israel for the explosions, condemning the attack as criminal Israeli aggression. Obviously, Israel has not commented, but the Lebanese government, is what I meant to say, has blamed Israel. The Israeli government has not commented. But this comes a day after Israel, basically warned, said that it was going to be potentially stepping up its conflict, its campaign with Hezbollah. Is that what we think is happening? That this is a precursor maybe to a much bigger explosion of war between the two sides?
There are several ways of looking at this, in my view. It's either a way to try to demonstrate to Hezbollah that Israel knows everything about them, that it can get to the sons of their leaders, because several of them were targeted, sons of high-ranking Hezbollah officials, and to try, in essence, to cow Hezbollah into submission and make clear that an increase of their attacks against Israel will be met with even further violence. Or it could be a prelude to an Israeli large-scale campaign against Israel at a time when Hezbollah is facing the chaos of this latest, very science fiction-like almost targeted attack against its operative. It's very clear that over the last few weeks, tension has been rising, and there's been a lot of warnings about an escalation on the border between Lebanon and Israel, with very stern warnings from the Biden administration to Israel not to consider a wide-scale campaign against Lebanon, because it cannot achieve militarily whatever it thinks it can achieve. The only outcome here is diplomatic.
And Kim, briefly, obviously Lebanese, Hezbollah is Iran-backed, and it appears, according to Iranian media, that the Iranian ambassador was one of those wounded. Now, this just adds to the number of Iranian officials and Iranian-supported officials who've been targeted, assassinated, not to mention the head of Hamas inside Iran over the summer. I mean, is that a concern, again, to wait and see whether Iran responds and joins in this war?
Kристиан, over the last 10 months, it's been very clear that Iran and Hezbollah, whatever you think of them, whatever criticism we may have of them, are not interested in a wider regional war, and they've been showing pragmatic restraint, let's call it that way. I know that's not what it feels like for residents of northern Israel, but you can just imagine what an all-out war could look like. Israel has clearly understood that it can keep pushing these red lines, and if it doesn't face heavy fire back, it keeps pushing those. This is what I call a game of Middle East roulette, and it's a dangerous one, because at some point Israel will go too far. and it will ignite a regional conflagration that brings in Hezbollah, but also Syria, Iran, of course, and then eventually the United States. And that's what the Biden administration is deeply concerned about.
And again, the Secretary of State is traveling to the region, not sure his exact stops, but obviously attempting to get a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas as well. Just very quickly, just describe, there's a call for citizens to donate blood. I mean, describe, how bad it is on the streets.
Well, right now it's fairly quiet, but it was very chaotic for a few hours. You could hear sirens wailing in cities in southern Lebanon. We've seen descriptions of people running on the streets, beating their chests, crying, because you have to remember that these pagers, they went off a little bit everywhere. Hezbollah operatives aren't necessarily walking around in uniform. So they may be in civilian clothes, they're buying groceries, they're at home with their children. A little girl was killed in the Bekaa Valley. So suddenly you have, hundreds of explosions going off across the country and people unsure of what is happening in a country that has been in a state of war over the last year, that has been through an economic collapse, and that has been through the largest non-nuclear explosion in modern history in just 4 years ago. So the state of chaos and fear in the country is considerable. And now, of course, also waiting to see, again, what next.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for your observations and your analysis. Kim Gattas from Beirut.
Almost 200 people injured in the pager blast that occurred Tuesday afternoon were treated here at the American University of Beirut Medical Center, where the chief medical officer told us that even though there were women and children among the injured, the vast majority were young men. Now, thousands of people were injured in apparently simultaneous pager blast that took place at about 3:30 in the afternoon Tuesday in areas where Hezbollah has a strong presence. Now, here outside the hospital, friends and relatives of those injured are waiting for news. Not surprisingly, most do not want to appear on camera, but off camera, one told us, for instance, that a friend of his received a message on his pager. He picked it up, looked at it, and it exploded in his face, damaging his eyes and his fingers. Another individual who said he was a supporter of Hezbollah told us that despite these injuries, morale within the group is still high and that those who were injured will soon return to the front. Now, Thursday afternoon, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is expected to comment on the events of Tuesday. But on Wednesday morning, Hezbollah put out a statement saying that there would be hard atonement awaiting the so-called criminal enemy that was behind what they described as Tuesday's massacre.